With Motogp 25 switching to Unreal Engine 5, a lot of players are struggling to get good performance. Today I'm going to break down the performance menu and at the end show off my camera settings so that you have the game set up best for your enjoyment. Let's jump in. So first things first, we have a few basic stuff at the very start of the settings. We're going to run through video resolution. Of course, that is just your monitor or TV screen or whatever you are playing your resolution. More often than not, the game does recognize it from just launching it and sets it automatically. Make sure you set it to whatever you have it and don't have it somewhere kind of like has to be downscaled or upscaled, as that then can change performance. So for me, I have a 1080, where's it gone? There she is. 1920 by 1080 is my resolution. So again, if you have it 1:1, it just means best performance because you're going to have less work to do in the background. Windowed mode, that will be basically the only reason you'd ever have this on is you have two monitors and you want to be able to tab out and kind of switch between them without the game stuttering as much. What happens when you have window mode on is that you lose performance because the game is kind of, shall we say, in a state where you can easily get in and out of it. So again, if you're struggling for performance, definitely leave this off. VSync. At this point now, most people know that VSync is a no-go in most racing games. What it does is it smooths out the gameplay but adds a huge input lag. Never, ever, ever, no matter how bad the game is playing, add VSync or vertical sync as it's actually known into any racing game, because it'll just add an input to lag and it just ruins the game for you really. Next up is resolution scale. Now you can scale up. Also, I've got to say, if you press your right stick in, it gives you a quick little explanation on what everything does, because not everyone's going to know what all of these things do. And as we get down into some of the more kind of interesting stuff, it gives some good idea what you're changing. Now, for me, resolution scale, if you want to upscale it, again, it's going to take performance. If you downscale it, shall we say, it can look a bit weird and not give you the performance benefits that you would hope. So for me, leave it 100%, leave it alone. It's not really something you'll gain much performance out of personally from my testing. Now, update to frame rate. Oh no, this might be a bit controversial for some people, as you can have dynamic, which means the game will run at whatever it can kind of get the game to run at. It'll kind of bounce up and down. I would not recommend this. In a racing game, the biggest thing you need is consistency, whether it be in your riding or the game's performance elsewhere. So I wouldn't recommend, if you can, at a minimum run 60. Now, I would recommend 90 or 120. Now, it depends on if you're going for having this game to look really beautiful, the crowd looks amazing, the crowd very loud and have a very, just to feel like you're in the actual race. I'd probably run at 90 and then have some of the graphics a bit higher. If you want it ultra smooth, really, like if you're really going taking it seriously this year and trying to maybe get into sort of the esports things, higher FPS is always better, game runs smoother and your inputs are just overall better on a higher frames per second. So for me, 90 is where I'm at the moment, because the game on ultra is what I run. I obviously at the moment don't have it set up, as I've just been playing with the settings for the video. The ultra for me, I get about 85 to 90. So what I've done is I've limited it, because sometimes it goes over 90, but for me, I don't want the game to try and go ultra 120 and then struggle to go over 90, when I'd rather just limit it to 90 and then the game has a little bit of a headroom above it if it needs it, when the game needs an extra little kick. So again, 60 at a minimum for me. Now, if you have to run 30, you have to, but the game will feel very blocky and lumpy, so I wouldn't recommend anything below 60 in today's times. Really is kind of like the industry standard, shall we say. So again, 60 if you can't really get anything else out of it, but 90 for me is the sweet spot. Now we're into the advanced section here now, so there is a lot of things I'll have to explain, so I'm going to try and do my best job of reading out some of these bits and bobs here. But I'm going to start with at the very top right. You have this lovely little thing here, it's called quality, and it will basically, you can go low, medium, high, very high, or ultra, and it will give you all different presets. Again, you can right click on it and it'll just tell you exactly what it does. And for me, ultra, I can run it again, like I said, 80 to 90 FPS. My computer thankfully is quite good, but of course, as I mentioned in the intro, a lot of people are having issues with. So what I would do is I just go to custom and I would play with them myself. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to leave it on my ultra, and then as I change things, you'll see what you get out of it. Now, next on our list, we have the FSR and DLSS, and these are both forms of upscaling, super resolution as it's called there, and upscaling AI super resolution and all that kind of stuff. Now, unfortunately, so basically with these, you can have ultra performance and ultra kind of graphics. You can go really high quality and stuff like that. The same with the other one. Now, for me, they don't work particularly well from my testing. You either have pretty poor graphics and decent performance, or the game looks amazing and runs pretty poorly. So to be honest, I would actually not run these. Now again, feel free to, again, in all these videos I always make that I'm giving you help with settings, I always tell people, take it into your own hands and actually go out and try and experiment with them yourself. You might find things that I've overlooked in this video saying it doesn't work very well on my computer, my graphics card. If you're on console, it will be slightly different. So again, I always kind of recommend playing with them, but for me, these two boys are better left off because they're actually a bit of a hindrance in my opinion at the moment. So I would definitely leave these off. But again, try and play with them. If you can't get anything else out of the game, you might get some resolve with them. Now, next up is the anti-aliasing. With the anti-aliasing, it's just a technique used basically to smooth out jagged edges. And a lot of digital artwork and gaming have it out. So basically, when you have it off, the game looks really sharp and poor. For me, anti-aliasing is one of those things that if it's not turned on really high, it makes the game look poor regardless of the textures or the lighting. So for me, I always try to run this high. I'd always try and I'd sacrifice elsewhere to keep the anti-aliasing as high as possible. It just, for me, it really knows what you do. But when you're kind of, I presume people will be watching this on maybe a phone and doing it in game, turn the anti-aliasing completely off and you'll see how rough the game looks with it. It's really, it looks quite jagged and stuff. So again, I'd keep this as high as possible within reason. So again, I'd probably keep it on either of these settings alone high. I wouldn't really go below that because then the game does look pixelated and stuff like that. And it's such a high, or not pixelated, it just looks sharp. Again, if you do play with them, you will understand what I mean. Next up is the textures. It's simply the kind of quality of textures. Again, this is one of the ones that I wouldn't go too low because the game then can look kind of blocky and like Minecraft. So again, medium or high. We will get into other ones in a minute where I will really cut back on ones where you'll gain performance back. But for now, first 2 or 3 here we've had, I'd kind of keep these at somewhat kind of high really. So the anisotropic filtering is very similar to our anti-aliasing. It just kind of does the same thing where it really helps with sharp edges in the distance and stuff like that. So again, what I do normally suggest is if you can have the anti-aliasing as high as possible, you could maybe then lower this to maybe 8x, because again then you're getting back a bit of performance. And again, what I like to try and do, and I did try and do, now thankfully I don't have to do it with my PC because it's quite decent, but what you can do is maybe play with anti-aliasing a bit low and then the filtering a bit higher, and you will probably find that there's a sweet spot where you'll get good graphics, good clean images, and actually a bit of FPS bonus. So again, I would suggest that maybe try different kind of combinations of the filtering and the anti-aliasing together. Now, next up is shadows. Pretty basic. I wouldn't go below medium. If you go to low, the game, it looks very obvious that your shadows have been kind of decreased enough, and the game looks really Xbox 360. So again, I wouldn't go below medium. Higher, they are pretty extensive on the game. Every object and everything in the game casts a shadow, so if you really have high shadows on, it is pretty intensive. So again, if you can't run it, go medium, but as always, running them the higher will be the better image. But again, there is ways of making the performance better by decreasing everything, but then the game will look like a potato. So for me, medium shadows is okay. Low if you have to, but again, I would really try to get away from these because the game does look quite poor again. Now, next up we have reflections. You can kind of go anywhere with these. Basically, the reflections reflect light off objects, but what I find is that when you're racing, you don't notice these reflections, so you can go pretty medium or low and you'll get a nice performance boost back off that. For me, again, don't need to run it low personally, but I have noticed that when I turned it down and was in a race with other bikes, I didn't really notice a big difference. It wasn't something I was like, oh, I can really, it wasn't like the anti-aliasing where it's like, oh, I can really visually see that the settings are low. So again, I would play around with this on maybe a lower setting if you're still struggling for FPS, and that'll be a way to get it back. So next up is the ambient occlusion. Now what that basically does, it's a graphics setting that can allow natural darkening effect on soft shadows, and kind of creates, like it would say, it's like another version of shadows on other objects. So like it can cast shadows on other objects in a way, if that makes sense. I can run this pretty low and not really notice much of a difference personally. Again, I keep saying it, you're gonna have to kind of play with these yourself. If you turn your shadows down low, you could maybe try run the ambient occlusion a bit higher to kind of cover it up, or again vice versa, you can play with these together to get a bit of a different feel. But for me, medium is okay. High is probably unnecessary. You won't, again, on a racing game, it's going so fast, a lot of these shadows and stuff like this you can overlook and you can get away without seeing anything on it. Now, next up is depth of field. Depth of field basically is like a focal point where the objects in the distance have more of a blur and more of a natural look. Running these low can make the game quite jarring, and having it disabled can look a bit rough. What ends up happening is the objects that you're looking towards in the distance can be quite just kind of pixelated and weird. I'd I'd really struggle to go anything below medium. Obviously below medium is disabled, so I'd really want to keep this on, as this can really destroy the actual quality of the image. Now, next up, I have a good few here that you can basically completely turn off, and it will definitely get you a good chunk performance-wise. Motion blur, again, if you go to the description, motion blur just basically makes the game feel faster, gives you greater sense of speed. I don't like this at all. I turn it off. It gives you a good chunk of performance back. Personally, the motion blur, it does make the game feel faster, but it gives it, it's kind of I'm not really sure what way to say, but it doesn't feel natural, so I like to turn it off. I don't like, for example, coming out to turn 1 at Magello with a load of motion blur and trying to find it hard to pick out a breaking mark. I'd much rather actually have a crystal clear image at high speed, even if it doesn't look as realistic. Bloom is very much just a high bright lights and the reflection stuff. Again, you can turn this down. Now the game does look a bit more flat, I will admit, but again, bloom seems to be one of those things that's really a big performance chunk of my testing. Turning bloom down give me a good 10 to 15 FPS back at times just from this setting alone, so I'd definitely run this a bit lower. Medium is probably the sweet spot. Lower disabled, it will the game can look flat in terms of its bouncing of the blooming light and stuff like that, but at the same time, on too high it looks amazing, but it is a heavy hitter when it comes to the performance side. So last things we have are lens flare and particle effects. Now the lens flare is just the light bouncing off the camera, reflection kind of behind. You can disable this. A lot of people don't like it. Again, it's free performance in my eyes. It can make the game look a bit more appealing, but at the same time, if you're struggling with performance, this would be one of the ones I would sacrifice. Same with the particle effect, makes the game feel a bit more alive, but at the same time, it's not worth the performance hit in my eyes. So again, I'd run it low or medium at best, really, if you're struggling with performance. So it'd be one of those things where I wouldn't really be putting too much into emphasis of running this a bit higher. So I'm going to just do a quick recap because I have gone through quite a bit there and I've kind of said a lot, so I'm going to just go through and kind of mark out the ones that I would say that are actually ones that you would actually go at if you're really struggling. So again, make sure you limit your FPS. That would be a definite one of those things that I would really suggest. 60 at a minimum, 90 if you can reach it. Don't really go at these. The FSR and the DLSS should I say, are actually for me a bit of an issue. Now again, play with them if you want, but I found I got no benefit of graphics / performance together. It was actually a hindrance on both. Keep your anti-aliasing a bit higher. I usually keep the textures high as well because the game can look poor. You can decrease the shadows slightly as well as the reflections. The game won't look as nice, but again, lighting plays such a big part in the game that you might lose too much of a graphical sense from it. Depth of field, you can decrease this smallly, but it will be one of those things that it will kind of point out too much. But really, for the main things, it's these bottom four: motion blur, bloom, lens flare, and the particle effect. You can kind of cut corners here to get a good bit of performance back. This will be the ones that I'd be going at if I was struggling, as well as obviously making sure that your resolution is correct and that you don't have VSync or any of these other settings on. So again, like I mentioned at the start, you have these other custom presets, these default ones. Play with these. These might be good enough that you can just go low, medium, or high, and that could be enough. What I like to do usually on other games, for example, more kind of like story player games, if I struggle for graphics, is that if I start ultra, it's unplayable. Very high, okay, it's a bit better, and then I get somewhere it's like, okay, this is okay at high, it plays well but doesn't look great. And then what I'll be like, okay, so like the anti-stropic filtering is on 4, what if I try that on 8? I was like, oh, the game looks a bit better, but I didn't lose the performance. So you can actually, we'll say, kind of mask the game by playing it on high, but then slightly adjusting the other actual advanced settings to make it a bit better. So again, I hope this has helped, because I know a lot of people have been complaining that so far this game has not been pretty on the eyes from launch, and I feel it's probably a bit hard done by, because I know the jump from Unreal Engine 4 to 5 has played a big part in the game, maybe not running as smooth as in years gone by, but I still feel the game runs pretty well on Unreal for me. So last but not least, we have the actual camera. Now I use the close third person. If you use your bumpers, you can go through and you can use distance, you can use close, you can go helmet, which is terrible, you can use cockpit, which is better, and then you have first person. So you have a few options to use. Now I only use the close third person one, so I'm going to run you through my settings. So field of view I've set to 5 degrees. Field of view is how kind of a fish eye lens you can really widen your view. For me, I find it's a good way to get a good extra bit of vision left and right. Distance is just straight back from the bike. I like to be as far back as possible. The reason I don't use the distant third person one is that, like, if you watch when I go from one to the other, it like lifts up, so instead I'm kind of looking down at the track now, whereas you look at that, it's like I'm looking nearly at the start light. So for me, it's one of those things that it's kind of feels a bit weird to look at, whereas years gone by I used to do this, and I've tried playing with this one to see if I can get it something similar to what I want, but I actually can't, so I'm back to playing on this. So again, -15 for the distance as far back as I can go. Just again, you can see a bit more. You can see when someone's gone for a lunge, or especially when you're against the eye, they can be in your kind of blind spots right there. So if you go back a little bit further, you can see a bit more. Now the height, pretty obvious, just kind of rotates around the rider and can be higher or lower. For me, 8 is around the sweet spot. If you go to 10, it can start looking down again. And again, if you go too low, you're -10, you're kind of looking straight along the horizon, which for me isn't a nice effect. So again, I go for probably 6 to 8 would be the sweet spot. At the moment, I like it on 8. Now these next few settings here, acceleration effect, you will notice this, that when you take off and really accelerate, the bike kind of goes away from you, and then when you brake, it comes back into shot, so you feel like the camera really slams forward. You don't want this on in a bike game or any racing game. You don't want any of these in any racing game. You don't want these effects on where your camera moves to create a feeling of speed or some sort of like sensation. What you want is a clear, steady camera where you can pick your braking markers, see your apexes, and see where you need to put the bike. That's always going to be the best way to go fast in these games, is to have a real consistent camera that doesn't move. So that completely rules out the acceleration effect. Dynamic cam, it kind of tries to simulate in third person what the rider's head is doing, where he looks into the corner and looks left and looks right as you're changing direction. It just makes the game floaty for me. Again, don't want this on ever. Personally, it's not a good thing. I don't think there's any benefit of running this. It doesn't look good to me, personally. It doesn't feel good when you're riding. It gives a real kind of floaty feeling. So I definitely would disable this. And the effect of high speed, this is just like a vibration to, again, try to increase the actual sense of speed. I don't like it on. Again, it's at certain speeds above, it gets hard to pick out braking markers. It's not something you'd want to actually run, so I never actually run it. And then final thing is off-track vibrations. When you run onto the dirt, does the camera shake around mad? This one is probably less important, because if you're already on the dirt, you've already made a huge mistake, so your camera vibrating probably won't give you much. I disable it because I just don't like it, as I found once or twice that I went into a long lap and the off-track vibration started kicking in, that the game didn't recognize that I was still on track and I thought I was on the dirt, so for that reason I disabled it. And yeah, that is that. Now, of course, you can do everything else the same again in all the other camera angles, and it probably makes it a bit better, but for me, everything just feels a bit weird. So I'd really like the helmet cam is really, really poor, unfortunately. I actually probably will make a video on the helmet cam in its own right at some point, so I feel how poor it is. But that has kind of been it for today. I hope you have enjoyed. We've gone through a lot. If you have any questions, let me know with a comment down below, or again, feel free to join my Discord. There is a link in the description. You will get in contact with me a lot easier through Discord. I'm a lot more active than I am in kind of YouTube comments there. But again, if you have any questions about anything about the camera or the graphical settings, shoot me a comment or message me on Discord, and we can try and solve some of the issues, because I know a lot of people have been struggling with issues on the game so far. So yeah, I hope I have helped. I really have tried to test everything as best as possible to give you decent feedback on what's good and what's not too good to change. So again, I hope these settings have helped, and I shall see you on track sometime soon. Thanks for watching. Slán go fóill.